we got that accomplished, it took a little behind-the-scenes work, talking to the individual cab members, and talking to commissioner members, to get them to see it from a positive aspect. And, you know, I convinced people it was going to be a good thing. And it's the same thing, you know, when you look at the responsibilities of being a cab member. Number one responsibility is to carry what? The message from your community back to the commission. How did my community feel about this? That's our number one job. And you're right, the only way that's going to work is somebody, yeah, you can put it in a cab report and send it in, but when you get up here at the microphone and you explain it from the heart, what really happened and why your cab feels this is good or the cab feels this is bad, you know, it means something. It means something to the commissioners to hear it firsthand from you guys. So, you know, that's just my bit on how important it is to be here at the meetings and to listen to what people are saying and kind of get the pulse of what everybody thinks about an issue. And, you know, every community is different. Yes, you know, the primary people who attend our meeting are hunters, trappers, anglers, but we've gotten some, you know, members of the public who regularly and routinely attend our meeting just to know what's going on and give us their comments. Maybe it's the way we conduct ourselves, maybe it's the way we communicate with the department, and maybe they'd like to see some improvements, but that's important because those members those people are members of the community, and they have just as much right to come to our meetings and tell us we're doing a good job or we're doing a bad job, or here's how you could do a better job. And, you know, and that's the way it's supposed to work. Tony, one of the things that, you know, Tony went over was cab roles and responsibilities. And that's really important to take that message home. And the importance of selecting a chair, a vice chair, trying to put together a board that really represents your community. And I think that those members that come, cab members that come to these meetings, they do that because most of the cab members that I've known for the last 15 years now, I see the same ones here. I see the same dedication in those individuals, and I know how difficult it is for some of them to get participation. But if they can't get somebody else to come, they will be here representing their community. And, you know, one of the big issues and why I stay in contact with a lot of the cabs is that when it's budget time, you know, we need to plan for what the various counties are going to spend, and that's 17 different counties. And you know, we asked to have a budget, and I remember back in the days when the budgets would come in written on the back of a brown paper lunch bag sometimes, and sometimes it would be on less than that, and sometimes you wouldn't get a budget at all, and sometimes you still don't get a budget at all. But we tried to make the process as straightforward and as easy for the cabs as possible. It's like now you just select what you're going to do. You don't have to do an awful lot of figuring anymore. Are you going to attend a meeting? Yes or no? What's your method of travel? Car, plane? You know, do you need a rental car? Are you going to have parking? How many days are you going to stay? You just fill in the boxes, and the spreadsheet does most of the work for you. And because of that, the response has been a lot better. And when it comes time to putting all the numbers together, it's relatively straightforward. When I hold a finance committee meeting, you know, it's done in less than a half hour, guys. That's something for a committee report, you know, to get done and get a budget accepted that we can present to the commission. The importance of that, and we're talking about in any given year, we've got over $100,000 sitting in various treasuries around the state. And if people aren't going to be coming to the meeting, that money could be better used sitting in the department's account rather than spread around the state. Now, you heard me, those of you who were in Elko and who have read the minutes, we're going to start auditing the county treasurers. Not because we don't trust them, but we want to know that there's consistency in the way people are reporting the expenses and accounting for the expenses. I mean, it's varies by individual counties. And I have to admit, the county treasurers see this little job that they have of being the paymaster as, why are we doing this? I really don't care about this. It's annoyance, you know, but it's necessary because we send them a lot of money. They have to account for the money, and they're not required to really go through it with a fine-tooth comb. But there's not, and pleading, we're not auditing this to try to catch anybody. We're trying to make it consistent. If somebody goes and stays in a hotel, they're going to have a receipt. Should the county treasurer check that receipt, or just somebody gives them a piece of paper that says, you owe me $340, and they give you $340 without any backup for it? Was there a hotel receipt? Was there a mileage accountability? Was there a plane ticket? You know, per diem is straightforward because we use the GSA schedule, depending on what city you're visiting and where the meeting is being held. So a lot of it's very simple, and the spreadsheet calculates all that. Now we're just going to carry it forward to make sure that we're accounting for it properly. And if we have cabs that consistently do not attend, we think that money ought to be pulled back into the department's treasury rather than sitting spread around the state. So, and just as we've had issues where counties who put in a budget, and that's what it is, guys, it's just a budget. You know, if you see you're going over it because you're going to all the meetings and you don't have enough money in your treasury, we can augment that. It's not a big process. So we don't want anybody not to come because they're looking at what's left in their account and they say, I don't have enough to go to the next meeting. That's not a good reason. We'll get you the money. Don't worry about that. So we want people to be here, and I think we had some comments made earlier, and there was some possible solutions about when you do have a workshop, where you do want to have, if you have a number of new members on your advisory board, to let them understand what goes on here. And a workshop, this would have been far more productive if we had a lot of new people who hadn't been through this for umpteen years, you know, longer than I've been doing this. So, you know, I think that was a very good suggestion to say maybe we ought to either start moving around the state with some meetings, or find some way and make some exceptions when we do have a workshop so that we encourage more people to come. And what's the best way to do that, to make it so it's not out of pocket? So, I mean, we're going to, you know, I offered the cabs years ago a cab expense form so that they can keep track of what they spend and what they can give to their treasurer. I know counties like Washoe and Clark have, their treasurers have their own form they want you to fill out, and that's fine. I could care less. I just made up something so there was going to be some consistency between those cabs who didn't have a county that provided an expense form. So anybody who needs one of those, just contact me and I'll email it to you. So budgeting is pretty straightforward. It's not rocket science. Accountability to your county treasurer, and we're gonna work on that so there's consistency in how we we're gonna audit those records. We'll do the first year, we're probably gonna audit every county, and then thereafter, it'll be random, we'll get 3 or 4 out of the 17 each year. In 3 or 4 years, we've done everybody, so no big issue. I think the important issues are attendance. Don't hesitate to present your community's views. I mean, there's been some contentious issues that we've had to deal with. And we've had meetings, I know at our CAB, where, there were opposing views, very strong opposing views, and you have to be somewhat diplomatic in how you deal with that. You may have strong feelings, but at the same time, you got to give people the opportunity to present their views. And we've had commission meetings where it went on for hours and hours, but everybody got a chance to get up to the microphone and say what they felt. And then it was deliberated on by the commission. And it's the same thing at your county CAB. When you guys vote on an issue, you have 3 members or you have 5 members, depending on the size of your county, and that's what you'll do. I mean, that's your responsibility. It ain't easy, but the buck's got to stop someplace, and it stops with you guys who are the CAB members. Does anybody have any specific questions about anything that we send out that, from like the budgeting or the spreadsheets or things that we could be doing a better job? I talk to most of you guys at the meetings, and sometimes I get picked on and sometimes I don't. But, we try, but your input is important, not only to carry your community's comments back, but things that you see going on that you think we could improve, and that's really the important part. That's what we're trying to do.
I think Gil needs to be applauded for what he's done for the county budgeting system. I've been here a little longer and gone through, like you said, we used to do stuff just helter skelter. We didn't know what the heck we were doing. We've got everything so easy now. I mean, anybody can do it. I got my grandson doing it. He pushes the right button.
Well, back in, what was it, 2008, Commissioner McNinch was given the responsibility to put together the CAB manual. And Glenn Bunch and myself, and all the heavy lifting was really done not by us, but the gal who helped us so much trying to get this all put down on paper. And the first one we came up, this one has 136 pages in it. And for a couple of years, every time somebody was a CAB member got one of these. And Kim realized that, that's a lot to print.
That was just for the receipt submittal process.
Yeah. No, not really. But then there's been revisions in 11 and 13 and 15. Every year after the legislative session, there's always some changes and some verbiage and stuff. So that's when the changes come up. And the current version that's on the website is, if you print it on 2 sides, it's only about 18 pages. Single pages, it's 30 some odd pages. But it's really good to make sure that each of your members know that it's online, it's on the website, they can read it, they can print it out if they want, it's up to them. But it does contain all the latest legislative issues that will affect the CABs, and it's nice to make sure that you guys are, up to date with what's going on, and if they have some comments, and that's how we make it better, is the feedback from you guys.
Any questions for Gail?
Thank you.
Thank you, Gil.
So I've had conversations with past Chairman Drew about the regulation process. There seems to be, the regulation process is a really cumbersome process, quite lengthy, and there seems to be a need to familiarize some with just how cumbersome and lengthy this is. We frequently people approach the commission and, hey, can we change this and can we change that? And conceptually, they may be really good ideas, but it's just important to understand the process through which those regulations are amended or adopted. I'll just kind of speak to it broadly. I've got a lot of specifics in here, but in the interest of time and making sure everybody stays awake, I'll try to go pretty quick. The Nevada legislature authorizes almost every department, agency, board, and commission to adopt administrative regulations. Administrative regulations take into consideration complex and technical issues that are not addressed in our state statutes. The process of adopting administrative regulations gives the public insight into how laws passed by the legislature should be implemented and opportunities to be engaged in that process. So it's a public process. Certainly the regulation needs to be consistent with the intent of the law, but it's more speaking to specific implementation. Conceptually, the legislature is passing a law that is either providing the commission direction, the department direction, or a law, but there's still details to the specific contents of the regulation or the implementation on that. So the regulation process, regulation is defined by NRS as an agency rule, standard, directive, or statement of general applicability which effectuates or interprets law or policy or describes the organization, procedure, or practice requirements of an agency. It also means a proposed regulation, the amendment or repeal of a prior regulation, and the general application by an agency of a written policy, interpretation, process, or procedure to determine whether a person is in compliance with a federal or state statute or regulation in order to assess a fine, monetary penalty, or monetary interest. So I know that's probably clear as mud. Just wanted to provide a little bit of that background. There's three different types of regulations: permanent regs, temporary regs, and emergency regs. Permanent regs are adopted using all the procedural formalities required by NRS Chapter 233B. The temporary regs are adopted in lieu of the permanent regulation. And then we have the emergency regs, which are under emergency circumstances may be drafted without holding the public hearings or observing other procedural formalities. An example, an emergency regulation was the lift of a take limit on fish in Wild Horse a couple of years ago due to the level of the lake. And that's the only emergency regulation that I can recall having acted on in the last 3.5 years since I've been director. But it was something that requires a governor's signature. We'll talk a little bit about the requirements, but these are cumbersome processes, and I kind of want to, I'll go through this pretty quickly. I think the permanent regulation, I think there's 21 steps here. There's certainly value in, this is a draft of the whole process that we're working on internally. But the thing about permanent regulations, they occur between July 1 of odd years and July 31st of even years. So what that basically means is that outside of the legislative session, anytime we get past July 31st of an even year, any regulation that starts in that process is a temporary regulation. And in order to make it a permanent regulation, we have to follow a different process. So we always try to beat the bushes and make sure that we address all of our regulatory needs prior to that July 31st deadline in an even year. So certainly you've seen a lot of regulations come before the advisory boards and the commission lately, but that's been our desire and intent to get those in the hopper as permanent regulations so that we don't have to act twice on them, once in the capacity of a temporary and then again address it again as a permanent. Does that make sense on the timing of that?
So amendments to existing regulations all under the same calendar timeframes?
They do. The department drafts the reg, step one, and so bear with me. Again, I'll try to go through this pretty quick. Don't try to remember it all. This will also be available online. Again, this is a draft document that we're preparing for internal knowledge, to be able to check all these boxes. It's not a simple process. And really, that's the take-home message here, is that we have different types of regulations. Each process is different, and none of them are particularly simple. The permanent regulation process is the most lengthy, probably for obvious reasons. But if you're going to have a permanent regulation, you want to make sure that you do your due diligence and dot all your I's and cross all your T's. The department will draft that regulation. And we can even back this up further to the petition process, where a petition is brought before the commission. But let's assume that this is starting at a point where either the commission has directed the department to draft that regulation through a petition process, or the department is drafting that regulation as per passage of a bill and in compliance with direction in statute. So the department drafts the regulation, determines if there is a small business impact, and prepares a small business impact statement. This is a statewide requirement. All regulations have to do an evaluation of whether or not there's impact to small business. The department may need to conduct a survey, or other tools may be used to determine if there's an impact. So Survey Monkey or other things can be used to determine if there's an impact. If there's not an impact, we can simply say that. If there is, we need to describe it. The department notifies the governor's office of the proposed change. The regulation language and small business impact statement are submitted to the Legislative Council Bureau for drafting. An R number, the regulation number, will be assigned at that time, and the LCB is required to draft the regulation within 30 days of receipt pursuant to NRS. Occasionally, with more substantive regulations, drafting may take longer than 30 days. Once the regulation is received back to the department, it's reviewed to ensure that the regulation carries out the intent of the department. Oftentimes, with some of the specific things we deal with, smokeless powder, these subtle nuances exist, and there can be either conflicting language in the regulation, or the intent is lost. And so we need to review the language. We provide our language to LCB. They provide language that they're comfortable with in a legal framework, and they send it back to us, and we verify that the intent of the regulation is still intact. The department then notices for workshop 15 or more days before the commission meeting, in compliance with open meeting law. Open meeting law applies to all those workshops. The workshop is held at the commission meeting, where public comment is allowed to occur along with commission discussion and any changes to that regulation. After the workshop, public comment is considered. If there are changes that have occurred and they were substantial, it will need to be resubmitted to LCB, and there's some question as to what constitutes a significant or substantial change in that, and sometimes typically we have to get it to LCB just to determine if that change is substantial or not. But it's resubmitted for a revision, which can take, again, 30 or more days. So if there are no changes, or the changes weren't substantive, then the regulation can proceed to an adoption hearing. If another workshop is needed, then we go back and we repeat steps 6, 7, and 8, and if not, we can proceed to an adoption hearing. The department will complete the notice of intent to adopt. This must be noticed 30 or more days before the commission meeting. And again, open meeting law applies to all adoption hearings. So the adoption hearing is held at the commission meeting, where public comment is allowed to occur along with commission discussion and changes to the proposed regulation. After hearing public comment, the regulation was not adopted, there could be another workshop or adoption hearing in the future. Repeating following steps 6 through 11. If the regulation was not adopted and changes were made to the regulation, again, were they significant? Were they substantive? If so, then it needs to go back to LCB, which can again take 30 plus days. If the commission adopted the regulation, there were no changes made, or the changes weren't significant, then the regulation can proceed to the legislative commission. The legislative commission process is comprised of, it's a kind of a bipartisan body that approves those regulations and verifies that the agency attempting to enact that regulation followed all the process and that that product is consistent with that legislative intent. The department must submit an informational statement, small business impact statement, notice of adoption, regulation language, and form for filing administrative regulations to the LCB for submittal to the Legislative Commission. Some of those legislators will read that packet, reach out to us, or we may reach out to them to provide that explanation in advance of the Legislative Commission meetings. The LCB will once again review the regulation and produce a final version for submittal to the Legislative Commission. The regulation will be placed on the next scheduled Legislative Commission meeting agenda or the subcommittee to review regulations meeting agenda. The Legislative Commission doesn't have regular meeting dates and they don't have a regular schedule. They kind of wait until they have a substantial number of regulations and then call a meeting. So it makes it difficult for us to anticipate when those meetings occur. Department staff must attend the Legislative Commission meeting or the subcommittee to review regulations meeting and provide explanation, sometimes defend that particular regulation. The Legislative Commission can adopt or defer the regulation. It can be deferred back to the department, the commission, or to another Legislative Commission meeting. When it's deferred, the Legislative Commission will provide a reason. We've had a couple regulations deferred in the past couple years. Some of the reasons for deferral with appeal wasn't clear in the elk arbitration case. The regulation wasn't clear if whether or not the decision of that panel would be final and binding, or if there was an appeal process. With the trap visitation and the merit, there was language. One of the legislators on the Leg Commission said, well, it doesn't appear that either side is happy with this. I suggest we defer it until after the next session. And that was prior to the 2015 session. So we've had several regulations in the last couple of years deferred for various reasons. If the regulation is adopted, it will be effective upon filing with the Secretary of State. The LCB will file it the same day it was adopted. The adopted regulation will be received by the department from the Secretary of State. If it is deferred back to the department, it'll need more workshop and adoption hearings and repeat previous steps. The final step is if it is deferred to another Legislative Commission meeting, the department will need to provide more information to select legislators. It is usually deferred until the next meeting, of which the LCB will automatically place the regulation on the agenda. So the take-home message is that there is a whole lot of hoops, I's to dot, T's to cross, opportunities for public input, engagement, and it goes to LCB several times, and it goes back before the legislature, and there are multiple public meetings in this venue and in the CAB process to collect input and develop regulation. The permanent regulation is 21-step draft process here is again by far the most lengthy and most cumbersome, but given the permanent nature of the regulations, I guess it stands to reason. Any questions on that or comments?
Just a quick comment. When I asked Director Wasley if he could step us through this process, it was a couple of reasons. I think I wanted to make sure all of us understand all the steps, all of you understand all the steps, and realize that there's a lot of things that go on behind the scenes in between meetings, and there's a lot of redundancy built into the system. So if you guys are seeing things at the CAB level for second, third, fourth, fifth times, 12th time, health arbitration, right? You probably are seeing it for the 12th time, but this is why. We're just making sure we're following this process. So I just wanted to make sure it was clear to you guys what's going on, and when you have your members ask, hey, haven't we seen this 3 times already? You can say, yeah, and here's why, whether it was deferred, whether it was something we had to go back to a workshop on, whatever the case may be.
Whenever LCB changes that language, we're back into the workshop mode. And so we can't say, well, White Pine County really didn't care about this change, even though the language has changed. You know, we're not going to workshop it. You know, this is the process. We need to follow that process as lengthy and cumbersome as it is.
Mr. Chairman, so, and along that same line, there's a, let's use the traffic, for example. There are places in this process where it gets looped in, and you get a specific legislator with a specific issue, traffic, where it can circle around at the end of this process several times, and we never see it. And so there are times where the department's being criticized or continued public comment about you're not taking care of this, you haven't done this. Now you'll see where it's been looping through. There's a lot of power with people on those committees, and if they're in the right place, the right time, with the right issue, they just continue to get deferred for different reasons, on and on and on and on, and in perpetuity, and just perpetuates that same process. It's completely out of our hands, and that's going to take a whole different process if you don't like how that's done. There's the reason. That's where it's at. That's how that stuff happens. Used to be a commissioner on here, Bill Bradley, everybody knows him, and he made the statement one day. He said, "There's one thing that he always tells everybody: if you like hot dogs or the law, you don't want to know how either one of them's made." That's his why.
Any other questions on the permanent regulation process?
Director Losley, I'd just like to thank you. That just lifted the fog for me on a lot of the stuff that we do here on the commission. I appreciate it.
So we thank former Chairman Drew for making sure that made its way to the agenda. I didn't choose this.
It only took me 5 years to figure it out, so I figured we could expect.
Less cumbersome, I'll run through these next two, the temporary and emergency reg process a little bit quicker. Temporary regs occur between August 1st of even years and June 30th. So at this point, any regulation that we take on is a new regulation, and it's when that number is issued. And so we had an R number issued for permanent regulations. LCB issues a T number for temporary regulations. All those regulations that are already in the hopper have an R number. They're okay. We've already started the process. But if somebody were to come in today with a petition to the commission to consider a new regulation, and we drafted language, anything that's submitted to LCB for its initial review after August 1st is temporary regulation and would be subject to this process, and then a second time the process that we just went through for the permanent regulation. So again, the department drafts the regulation, determines the small business impact statement, et cetera, notification to the governor's office, where the first place where this changes from the previous is it's a T number rather than an R. Notices for workshop, 15 plus days before the commission meeting, open meeting law compliance, workshop held at the commission meeting, public comment, and the commission discusses and potentially changes. After the workshop, public comment is also considered. If another workshop is needed, again, repeat steps 6 and 7. If not, proceed to an adoption hearing. The department will complete the notice of intent to adopt. This must be noticed 30 plus days before the commission meeting, complying with open meeting law. The adoption hearing is held at the commission meeting, again, a public process. After the hearing, after hearing the public comment, and having consideration of that comment, if the regulation is not adopted, there could be another workshop or adoption hearing in the future following steps 6 through 10. And if the regulation was not adopted, it will need to go back to workshop for changes. When the regulation is adopted, it does not go to the legislative commission unless it is specifically requested by a legislator. So that's the big difference with the temporary regulation, is it doesn't require the leg commission approval. An informational statement and final version of the regulation must be submitted to LCB. Regulation is filed with the Secretary of State's office 35 or more days after the date the temporary regulation was adopted. It becomes effective once filed with the Secretary of State's office, and all temporary regulations expire November 1st of odd years. A permanent regulation must be adopted before expiration of the temporary regulation, or just completely evaporates, and that's where we refer back to the permanent regulation process. Any questions on the temporary regs?
Yes. Does the passing of a temporary regulation short circuit any of the 21 steps on the permanent when it's reintroduced?
No, you go back to,
Ground one.
yeah, you get to do all the workshops.
So I think under the statute, you can skip the workshop and not make significant changes.
If there isn't a substantive change,
Right, you already workshop it as part of the temporary, but that's about the only step.
still has to come back before this body, still public input on that.
But, going through a workshop can actually hurt a lot of time, obviously, because that's when, I mean, it's not putting new
Right,
material.
because the
You're
time-
ironed all of
yeah.
that out, usually, hopefully by the time it comes out again. So it's still at least an avenue to pursue, if you at least check it out that you're,
Right, you obviously can't, more process is never wrong, but you have to.
right.
Any other questions on temporary regs? And the last one, which is pretty quick and painless relative to the first two, is the emergency regulation. They occur anytime there's an emergency. Emergency is defined as an unforeseen circumstance which requires immediate action and includes, but is not limited to, disasters caused by fire, flood, earthquake, or other natural causes, or any impairment of health and safety of the public. So on that definition, we use the drought scenario at Wild Horse to lift the limits and enact an emergency regulation. We anticipated a catastrophic all species, all age die-off, the aquatic resources, fish resources in Wild Horse Reservoir, and use this regulation to lift that limit. The department drafts the regulation and a written statement to the governor of the emergency and the reasons for that determination. No LCB review, workshop, or adoption. And this is something that certainly the governor's office and the governor are very sensitive to exercising this authority, especially our sitting governor, who is a strong supporter of transparent government and government, by the people. So it's a power that he's very judicious in when and where he exercises it, and it took significant coercing and conversation to try to elevate the Wild Horse issue. There was reluctance, initial reluctance there, that ultimately the governor supported that, and it worked out well. The governor must endorse the statement of the emergency and the proposed regulation. The department will make the emergency regulation available to the public by posting it and by making it available to any member of the public upon request no later than 9 a.m. on the first working day before the date on which the emergency regulation will be filed in the Secretary of State's office. The two documents the governor signed are filed with the Secretary of State's office and the LCB, along with an informational statement. Emergency regulations expire 120 days after submittal. The department must seek out a permanent or temporary regulation prior to expiration. And again, go back to those processes. An emergency regulation can only be adopted as an emergency once. So if with 4 years of drought, of each year, we came in at August and asked the governor, hey, we want another emergency regulation, he would tell us to pound sand. So it's a simpler process, but it circumvents a lot of that public input, and that's by design. If there's the emergency exists, and we have this really lengthy process that ensures public input, if there truly is a legitimate emergency, that's the only way that you can circumvent that public process. And regardless of that regulation, it expires 120 days after adoption. Any questions on the regulation process or types? Thanks for putting that on the agenda, former Chairman Drew. I think it's, I've certainly learned a little bit, more than a little bit going through that. And so hopefully you guys did as well and have some appreciation for the public process as it relates to regulation adoption.
And thank you for putting it together, because I'm sure that was a 5-minute process.
I do have some staff.
Moving on to the next section, without a department